I was in the middle of what I call the great thermostat war of freshman year. My friend was excited about starting college. She grew up in Phoenix where temperatures hit triple digits in summer. Her family was frugal with air conditioning, usually just cracking windows rather than using cooling. She was used to warmth. When she arrived at her dorm and met her roommate from Colorado, things seemed good at first. They had similar taste in music, both were majoring in biology, and they liked the same TV shows. But then came the first night. My friend woke up shivering at 3 a.m. The room was freezing. She checked the thermostat, 50 degrees Fahrenheit. She bumped it up to 70 and went back to bed. The next morning, her roommate from Colorado was annoyed. She questioned why my friend had changed the temperature, claiming she couldn't sleep when it was hot. My friend explained that she was freezing because 50 degrees is cold. The roommate said she grew up in the mountains, that's what she was used to. My friend told her she grew up in Phoenix and was used to warmer temperatures. They talked and agreed on 65 degrees. My friend thought the problem was solved. It wasn't. Every time my friend left for class, she'd return to a meat locker. Every night after she fell asleep, she'd wake up shivering. The thermostat was reset to 50 degrees the moment her back was turned. When asked, the Colorado roommate would act surprised and apologize, claiming it was habit that she changed the temperature. This continued for weeks. My friend started wearing multiple sweaters inside. She layered fuzzy socks to walk around her own room. She couldn't study there because her fingers got too cold to type. After a cold night, my friend talked to her roommate again. She said she needed her to stick to their agreement because she was having trouble sleeping and couldn't focus on homework due to the cold. The roommate said she would try to remember, but she couldn't sleep when it was warm. My friend pointed out that 65 degrees isn't warm but a compromise. The roommate agreed with a dismissive tone. The next day, the room was at 50 degrees again. My friend went to the resident assistant for help. They had a meeting where everyone agreed that 65 was fair. The Colorado roommate nodded and talked about respecting shared space. That night, 50 degrees. Next, she went to the head of the dorm. Another meeting. More agreements and promises that things would change. They didn't. After a month, my friend gave up. She applied for a room transfer and was approved, but there were no spaces in their dorm. She had to move to a different building farther from her classes and friends. As one of the few friends with a truck, I helped her move. The Colorado roommate was there while we packed, with a smug smile. During one trip carrying boxes to my truck, I was alone in the room for a few minutes. I looked at that thermostat and had an idea. I opened the control panel and put a small piece of paper inside, breaking the electrical contact. The air conditioner shut off. It wasn't permanent damage, just a harmless prank. What I didn't think about was the weather. It was early September and temperatures outside were 98 degrees. By the time we finished loading the truck, the room was getting warmer. I said nothing. Later that afternoon, my friend texted me that the room must have been 80 degrees when she went back for her last few items. The Colorado roommate was fanning herself and complaining about the broken air conditioner. I felt a little guilty, but also satisfied. Then, at 3 in the morning, everything got worse. The Colorado roommate had found the paper wedge after hours of sweating in the heat. She texted my friend, who knew nothing about what I'd done, with death threats. She accused my friend of breaking the AC and threatened that she would make her regret being born. She warned my friend to sleep with one eye open. The final threat was that she would find where my friend now lived and make her pay. My friend was scared. She called campus police, who took the threats seriously. The school got involved. When they checked the security cameras in the hallway, they saw me entering the room alone during the moving. I confessed right away. I explained the weeks of cold my friend had dealt with and admitted to my prank. The school was understanding about my actions, though I did get community service but was harder on the death threats. The Colorado roommate ended up on academic probation, had to go to counseling, and nearly got expelled. This wasn't her first time threatening someone. My friend settled into her new dorm room with a better roommate who was fine with normal temperature, and I learned that sometimes petty revenge can backfire, but sometimes it can also show someone's true colors. For about a year and a half, I shared an apartment with someone I'll call my ex-roommate. We weren't best friends, but I thought we got along well enough. until she decided her friend should take my place. It started in November. We've been living together without major issues when she told me that she wanted me out so her friend could move in. No discussion, no heads up, just that I needed to leave. I was shocked, but I didn't want drama, so I found a new place and moved out. I figured that would be the end of our interaction, but we worked at the same company. After I moved out, she and her friends started making my workday miserable. It was subtle at first, whispers when I'd walk by, inside jokes, and fake smiles. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was paranoid. But then it got worse. They'd show up in the break room whenever I was there or park next to me. It felt like they were trying to make me uncomfortable. I kept my head down and tried to focus on my job. I didn't want workplace drama, so I stayed quiet, even though it bothered me. Then last week I was outside on my break, vaping and scrolling through my phone. I heard familiar voices and looked up to see my ex-roommate and her friend standing about 20 feet away. They weren't trying to be quiet. I overheard her friend making a comment about my appearance, asking if I owned a mirror. My ex-roommate said I probably couldn't afford one now that I was paying rent on my own. They both laughed, and I felt my face get hot. I kept my head down, pretending I couldn't hear them. Then my ex-roommate went inside, but her friend stayed out, and I noticed she had her phone up in a way that looked like she was taking pictures of me. I don't know for sure if she was taking photos, but the way she was holding it, angled in my direction while trying to be subtle, it seemed that way. I took out my own phone and snapped a few pictures of her doing this. Shortly after, she went back inside. That was it. I'd had enough. This wasn't just annoying, it felt like harassment. I went to the security office. I told the security officer I needed to report something that was making me uncomfortable. The officer asked what was happening, and I explained someone was taking photos of me without consent during my break. I told them she wasn't an employee but a friend of my former roommate who worked there. I showed the security officer the pictures I took of her, holding her phone up in my direction, and I gave her car's license plate number, which I knew from when she used to visit our apartment. The officer asked me to describe what happened. I explained everything. The history with my ex-roommate, how they had been talking about me, and how I felt targeted by them showing up wherever I was. The security officer asked if I had proof she was taking photos. I told him I couldn't see her screen in my photos, but you could see her holding her phone aimed at me while trying to be discreet. I also mentioned this was part of ongoing harassment. The security officer checked our company policy about non-employees on company property and taking photographs. He checked the security footage, and while it couldn't show her phone screen, it confirmed she was there when I said she was, holding her phone up in a way that matched my story. 2 days later, HR called me in. They said they'd investigated and spoken with my ex-roommate. Her friend was no longer allowed on company property. They'd also given my ex-roommate a warning about workplace harassment. My ex-roommate now has to take public transportation to work because her friend can no longer drive her. I see her waiting at the bus stop sometimes when I drive past. I don't feel bad about it. I put up with their behavior for weeks before I did something. All I wanted was to do my job in peace. If they hadn't pushed it by taking pictures of me, I would have continued ignoring them. The workplace has been quieter lately. My ex-roommate doesn't look at me anymore, much less talk about me. I do food delivery since the pandemic hit. It was a good way to make money when my regular job went on hiatus due to my medical condition. I have chronic joint inflammation that makes walking long distances difficult. Not enough to qualify for a handicap placard, but enough to make too much movement in a short time painful. The pandemic changed how restaurants operate. Where I live, things are mostly back to normal, but Taco Bell is always unpredictable. One day the lobby is open, the next day it's drive-through only. No consistency. Last Tuesday I got a Taco Bell order during the morning shift. It was pretty dead, barely any customers around. I parked my car and hobbled to the front door to pick up the order, only to find it locked. No problem, I thought. I'll just go through the drive-through. When I pulled up to the window, the employee looked at me with a bored expression. She told me I needed to come inside to pick up the order. When I explained that I had just tried the door and found it locked, She said I needed to go in through a different door. I tried explaining again that I had already attempted to come in, but she just stared at me. When I asked if she could just hand me the order through the window since there was nobody behind me, she flatly refused. That was it. Just a simple number. She wouldn't respond to anything else I said, acting like I wasn't even there. Keep in mind, there was nobody in line behind me. The place was dead quiet. Frustrated, I parked again and limped to a different door. Locked, then to a third door on the far side of the building. Finally, this one opened. When I got inside, the same employee handed me the food without making eye contact. I wasn't trying to be difficult, but I felt I should at least mention something. In a friendly tone, I told her that legally, every door for customers has to be unlocked during business hours, pointing out that it even says so at the top of the doors. The employee looked at me with a hostile expression. She told me that she didn't like having all the doors unlocked and that I should mind my business. When I pointed out that it was actually a safety issue and asked what would happen in an emergency, she dismissed me completely. She told me to take my food and go. When I insisted that it was illegal to keep emergency exits locked, when customers were inside, she asked if I was done and claimed there were other customers waiting even though there weren't any. I left anyway, my joints aching from the extra walking. When I got to my car, I was irritated. This wasn't just about me being inconvenienced. What if someone with more severe mobility issues tried to get in? What about the couple of small groups I saw eating inside? What if there was a fire? I called another Taco Bell location nearby to ask how to contact the district manager. They were helpful and connected me. When I explained the situation to the district manager, I expected an apology or at least some acknowledgement of the problem. Instead, he said he'd call the store and get back to me. An hour later, my phone rang. The district manager told me that he had talked to the store and claimed that the doors I tried were broken, adding that they were going to get them fixed. Before I could even finish expressing relief at this resolution, he launched into a tirade about how delivery drivers need to stop being upset about every little thing and bothering managers. He called us a real problem. I asked for clarification. He continued his rant, saying the food industry was sick of delivery drivers complaining all the time and that we all needed to learn how things work and stop making everything difficult. My irritation jumped from a 5 to a 10 instantly. I told him that I was disabled and that having to get in and out of the car multiple times was physically painful for me. I asked him to consider what would happen if someone with more severe mobility issues tried to get in and had to check 3 different doors, or worse, if there was a fire with customers inside. He simply repeated that the doors were broken, declared it the end of the story, and hung up on me. I sat in my car seething for a few minutes. Then I remembered my cousin who works in building safety. I called him, and he suggested I contact the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. OSHA took my report seriously and told me to call the fire department immediately, confirming that yes, all exit doors must remain unlocked during business hours when customers are inside. The fire department arrived at the Taco Bell before the district manager could get there. They found exactly what I described: locked doors that were supposedly broken but had no visible issues. There were still customers inside eating. A week later, I received emails from both OSHA and the fire department. They shared documentation showing the district manager had been forced to hire a locksmith to fix the perfectly functional doors, and the restaurant received nearly $1,000 in fines from the city. I tried calling Taco Bell corporate, but their phone system kept hanging up on me when I selected the option to speak to a representative. So I called the regional franchise owner instead and played the recording of my conversation with the district manager. What could have been solved by simply handing me the food through the drive-thru window or just unlocking the doors, which were not broken, turned into major fines and a safety violation on record. The regional owner called me back the next day, apologizing and telling me that the district manager had been reassigned. I'm not sure what that means exactly, but I haven't seen him during my subsequent deliveries. I don't enjoy getting people in trouble, but restaurant safety isn't a joke, and neither is treating delivery drivers like we're less deserving of basic courtesy. I'm tired of restaurants treating us like garbage. I became part of a complicated child support battle when I met my wife 5 years ago. Her story makes my blood boil. My wife had her oldest son when she was 20. The pregnancy wasn't planned, and while her boyfriend at the time agreed to stick around, things went downhill fast after the birth. Their son was born with a club foot that required multiple surgeries and ongoing medical care. Instead of stepping up as a father, this guy told my wife to her face that he didn't want much to do with his own child until he was fixed. Those were his exact words. What kind of person says that about their own child? He paid child support for about a year, then vanished from their lives. My wife packed up and moved back to her parents' home in another state. She focused on raising her son and making sure he got the medical care he needed, working multiple jobs while her parents helped with child care. Fast forward 13 years. Her son was 14, still dealing with medical issues, and my wife was struggling financially. She decided to apply for child support in her new state. When the deadbeat dad got the notice, he tried to get custody just to avoid paying. After 13 years of zero contact, he suddenly wanted his son back. Not because he missed him or wanted to make up for lost time, just to avoid his financial responsibilities. The custody attempt failed, but it cost my wife about $3,000 in attorney fees she could barely afford. Then, to make matters worse, the original state sent over paperwork showing a $0 balance for back child support. My wife thought that meant the case was closed and she couldn't get the money owed for those 13 missing years. That's where I came in. We met about a year after all this happened. When she told me the story, something didn't add up. My parents had gone through a messy divorce, so I knew child support obligations never just disappear. I suspected the original state had made a mistake. I told my wife what I suspected. I explained to her that child support obligations don't simply vanish and that if her ex was ordered to pay and didn't, he should still owe that money plus interest. She asked me if I was sure because the paperwork showed a zero balance. I told her I was positive and that the original state had made a mistake. Then I offered to make some calls to see what was happening if she was okay with it. She replied that she had nothing to lose. With her permission, I called the Child Support Enforcement Agency in her new state. I explained that I was calling about my wife's child support case and mentioned there might be a mistake with the balance transferred from the original state. When the worker asked what the problem was, I told them the documentation showed a zero balance, but her ex only paid for 1 year out of 14, so there should be 13 years of unpaid support plus interest. The worker said they needed to put me on hold while they checked into this. I spent an hour listening to hold music while they consulted with the original state. Finally, the worker came back and told me they would need to investigate this further and would be in touch. That started a year and a half of bureaucratic back and forth. Eventually, the original state sent my wife forms asking her to declare when her ex had actually paid child support. We filled them out together, documenting the single year he had paid, and sent them back. A few months later, an official letter arrived. When my wife opened it, she nearly collapsed. The original state had found records of all the missing years. The deadbeat dad owed about $104,000 in principal and interest. A hearing was set for November 2020. When the ex found out, he tried every trick in the book to avoid paying. He even divorced his wife who was ill and living in a care home, though they were still together. It was a ploy to hide assets. In November, the court date was set for April 2021. This was the State Child Support Services versus him, so my wife didn't have to pay for an attorney this time. Before the hearing, his lawyer called with an offer. The lawyer said his client was willing to settle for $60,000, but we needed to accept immediately, otherwise we might not get anything at all. My wife didn't hesitate. She said he owed this money to their son, not her, and that she wanted the full amount he was supposed to pay all those years. When April came, my wife attended the hearing. The ex's lawyer tried to tell the judge his client didn't know he had to pay. The judge pointed out that his client had made payments for the first year and asked how he could not know he needed to continue. The ex said he didn't have the money, mentioned his wife was ill, and said he didn't have many assets or income. The judge awarded the full amount but ordered monthly payments of $750. since the ex said he couldn't pay the lump sum. For months after the hearing, he only paid about a third of what he was supposed to. My wife was frustrated but resigned to the fact that she might never see the full amount. Then, in December, something happened. My wife started shouting in excitement, repeatedly saying, "Oh my God!" I rushed over, asking what was wrong. She told me nothing was wrong, everything was right because the entire amount had just hit her account. All of it. We never found out exactly why he suddenly paid up. Our guess is that he was facing jail time, or maybe they emptied his retirement account, or perhaps he tried to sell his house and discovered there was a lien on it. Whatever the reason, the money was finally where it belonged. The first thing my wife did was buy her son, now 18, a new truck. After all those surgeries and years of struggle, seeing him smile behind the wheel made everything worth it. The ex tried calling once to complain about how unfair it all was. He said my wife had ruined him financially and couldn't believe she would do this after all these years. My wife responded that she hadn't done anything. He had chosen not to support his son for 13 years, and all she did was make sure the records were correct. She hung up and blocked his number. Some people never take responsibility for their actions. The man who thought he could abandon his responsibilities to his child for over a decade finally had to face the results of his actions. And my wife can finally breathe easier knowing that the financial burden she carried alone for so many years has been lifted.